The most important thing is to understand that you have a problem. So just harking back to my early days of trying to raise the awareness about APTs and nation-state threats and cyber, I'm trying to raise the awareness that I think we're unquestionably in a new Cold War with China, one that is actually remarkably similar to the first Cold War with the Soviet Union. If you look at all the elements of that confrontation that took place in that 70-year period or so, whether it was the global competition for supremacy between America and the Soviet Union, you have that playing out with China. Whether it's an arms race, conventional one and nuclear one, you have that today with China. Whether it's economic warfare or a spy war or a space race, we're once again trying to get to the moon before China does, just like we did in the 60s with the Soviet Union. On every single level, we basically have the same scenarios playing out that have played out during the first Cold War. And the only argument that I often hear from people trying to say, oh, this can't be a Cold War, is look at all this economic interdependence we have with China that we didn't have with the Soviet Union. And one of the things I actually debunk in the book is this idea that the two economies, the Soviet bloc and the West, were completely disconnected. That is not the case at all. There were numerous connections. American banks were financing Warsaw Pact economies throughout the 70s and 80s. Much of the oil and gas industry of the Soviet Union that was, of course, financing this Cold War was running on Western technologies that were sold to them. We had sold military equipment and enabled some of the capabilities that they later developed early on in that Cold War. Now, the scale is different with China, unquestionably, and it's not exactly the same on that front, but the trend lines are identical. And I believe that we have to recognize that first and foremost. You still have the Biden administration refusing to say that we're in a Cold War. In fact, you hear statements that are quite the opposite, saying that we don't want to be in a Cold War. When someone is punching you, you may say that you don't want to be in a fight, but you really don't have a choice at that point. I guess you could choose to lose and give up, but I don't think that they would want that choice to be taken. So unless you're giving up, you're in a fight. And you are absolutely in a Cold War now with China. And it's important to recognize that so that you can start working on solutions. Again, first step, 11 other steps, but really critical to take that first step. And then the second issue is, what are those solutions? And I believe the first one is making sure that Taiwan never falls to China. And the book talks about the importance of Taiwan that I think most Americans do not have an appreciation for. There's this very simplistic view of Taiwan as a semiconductor manufacturing powerhouse, and it certainly is that, and semiconductors are absolutely vital to the global economy. I don't want to underestimate the importance of that, but Taiwan has mattered to us long before the dawn of the age of computing. General Douglas MacArthur in 1950 called it the unsinkable aircraft carrier because of its strategic position in the region, because of how important it is for, if China is able to take it, they'll be able to, I believe, to dominate Asia, to set the rules of the security and economic order in that region, which is the most important region in the world, arguably, with almost 50% of the world's GDP, much of the supply chains, much of the economic growth. So deterring China from being able to take Taiwan is really fundamental to our national security, and that goes into military domain, but it also goes into economic leverage that we can increase over China and decrease their leverage over us in areas like energy, particularly green tech, in areas like semiconductors, in areas like critical minerals, where they have much of the processing and refining capability. But it is also about looking at, how do you win the broader Cold War? If you manage to deter that invasion of Taiwan, and hopefully we will, you're still going to be in the Cold War. You're still going to be in this vital competition. And I believe that the way to win that is to win the technology race for the 21st century and identify 4 critical technologies that I think are going to be vital to the economic growth of the century. They are AI and autonomy, and pretty self-explanatory these days when you look at the evolution of those technologies, particularly in the last few years. The second one, just as important and related, is biotech and synthetic biology. Very exciting, the applications of AI to that field, not just in the areas of medical science that people tend to think about, but in the areas of bioenergetics, being able to develop new energy sources by combining biology and chemistry, and biomanufacturing, developing new materials using those type of processes. And again, AI is going to be essential to that. The third area is aerospace, space technology. We're seeing now, thanks to SpaceX and Amazon, what you can do with these huge constellations of satellites in low Earth orbit from a communications perspective, internet access, navigation, positioning, surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence collection, and the like, really revolutionizing the space industry in a huge way. And a large part of that was the lowering of the costs of lift into space that SpaceX and Elon pioneered with reusable rockets. And then the last area is green energy. So that's everything from EVs, batteries, wind, solar, nuclear. And that's where China is dominating, of course. In the first three areas, we've got an advantage. In some areas, it's smaller than others, but in EVs and green tech, we're losing badly. And then if you look at those four technologies, you also have two critical components that you need that go into those technologies. They are semiconductors, of course. And there we are on the knife's edge of either losing or winning, and we'll see what happens really in the next couple of years to determine that. And then the second one is critical minerals, which we are losing badly because China not only is trying to grab as many mining reserves around the world, but also, more importantly, refining and processing much of those minerals in China, polluting the planet, doing that with coal-burning energy, and dumping oftentimes those minerals below cost in our markets to make sure that no one else does it and that they keep our reliance on them. And this critical issue of rare earths and lithium and cobalt and nickel, all these sorts of really important minerals. Those are the 6 areas where we have to win, where we have to get leverage on China and reduce their leverage over us in order to win the Cold War. There's a lot of ideas in the book about how to go about doing that, so I encourage everyone to take a look.